Welcome back to another Telltale video review. This time we choose a classic science fiction story, the very first published story of Robert A. Heinlein.
So good.
The story is called LifeLine. It was published in Astounding Stories. Trying to remember what month, and I'm not going to succeed at that. I think it was one of the summer issues of 1939.
I feel like it was.
So it was at the very, very start of the Golden Age, which got its start with the July 1939 issue of Astounding. So I'll save that.
Yeah.
Of course, Robert Heinlein, he had been in the military.
Oh, I didn't know that about him.
I'm trying to remember what happened. I think he had an illness, like a muscular dystrophy or something like that, and he had to quit in the military. He had to quit his military career. He went back and trained to be an engineer, but his illness progressed to where he couldn't do that either. So he started writing.
Nice.
And that's when he wrote a book called For Us the Living, which has been published after his death, but it was never published back when he wrote it. So his first published work was LifeLine. And LifeLine fits into an overall future history that Heinlein wrote. And this is not in publication anymore, but for many, many years it was published. Maybe you can see the spine. I took the dust cover off so I can read it without destroying the dust cover. The Pass Through Tomorrow is a huge book of, well, not super huge. It is longer than this.
Yeah.
785 pages, all collecting all the stories and short novels that he wrote as part of this future history.
Oh,
now,
interesting.
he did write further novels after the early 50s that fit into this future history that aren't in that book.
Okay.
Stories like The Moon is a Harsh Mistress.
Oh, yeah.
And Time Enough for Love, which we've previously reviewed.
Yep.
That feature Lazarus Long. Lazarus Long first features in a story called Methuselah's Children.
Yes, you were telling
which
me about that
is in The Pass Through Tomorrow.
Okay.
And Lazarus Long has a connection to the character that appears in LifeLine.
Oh, interesting.
There's a brief mention of that character in one of the Lazarus Long stories. I think it was Moon is a Harsh Mistress. Character's name was, help me out here.
I can't.
You can't remember it either.
I mean, there were lots of names dropped in one
Pinero.
story.
I want to say Pinero,
Okay.
but I'm not sure.
There were a few names dropped in that
Pinero.
story. Yep.
Yes, Pinero is the scientist. And how Pinero became of interest is he invented a device which could trace your lifeline.
Where it starts and ends.
Scientifically, it was able to follow. He had this scientific concept of time being like these worms that all kind of converge and diverge into the future. And he could look down
worms.
yours, and by sending a signal down the timeline to where you were born, it would bounce back. He could then determine when you were going to die. Exactly the day and hour that you were going to die.
He knows when you're going to die. Straight up.
And it was scientific. This wasn't any kind of cards or tea leaves or anything like that.
Yeah.
This was a machine. And the tests were infallible.
Yep.
Okay, so problem with this is that
People don't like it.
well, people are scared to know when they're going to die, but more importantly, when the people who dove in and went to his clinic and got tested and found out the date of their death, they could then take out an insurance policy
Yes.
and collect.
So the insurance companies are really pissed off and want to sue this
Yeah.
doctor for his invention.
And of course they fail because they're basically doing the same thing with their actuaries.
Yeah.
Is trying to statistically predict when people are going to
Yeah.
die.
So everyone's like, why? There is no difference. And
Yeah.
then they want proof that it actually works because the scientific community is extremely skeptical.
Yeah. So he gives them proof. He tests them all and seals their death date in envelopes and including his own, and puts it in the care of these people, of this scientific group that wants to disprove him. Okay, so lots of interesting ideas. It's just a short story, and it's his very first short story, but there's so many interesting political and legal and scientific ideas being thrown out.
And there's also the
here.
personal ones. Like that one young couple that comes in.
Yeah.
He has a young couple that comes in and they die out the door.
Yeah, they want to know, and he says, "There's just something wrong with my equipment. Come back tomorrow." And he tries to keep them in his office past the time when it's supposed to happen. But of course, he knows that, they're going to walk out the door and get hit by a bus.
Yep. Yep.
If you really did have such a machine, that really would happen. Where there'd be
So
cases
it deals
like
with
that.
the personal burden of knowing. The personal burden of knowing and knowing that there's nothing you can do about it despite your best efforts.
And this is actually going to tie into another Philip K. Dick story that we're going to record it tonight. We'll post it in a few days. Paycheck, because it has to do with being able to look into the future and see what's going to happen in the future, and in particular, know your own death in the future. Paycheck follows a kind of similar theme.
Yeah. Really interesting stuff.
Yeah.
I have to say LifeLine officially is a top tale for me. I really enjoyed this read. It was very well done. And it's written kind of from multiple perspectives where the doctor is acting as a businessman and, dealing with all these things. There's articles, there's like paparazzi and all kinds of things following these cases and following this whole situation because it's such a big deal for the scientific community. So it was just really enjoyable. There were some really kind of like snarky, funny parts that made it like I felt so much reading this book.
Yeah.
And I find that the books I tend to enjoy are the ones that make me feel a lot of things. And this one made me feel a lot of different emotions at different points for how short it was.
Yeah.
It took no time at all to read, and yet so many feelings.
And for me, I have a little different perspective on it because I've read a lot of other Heinlein works, and I know that he does better than this in the future.
I'm
You've
excited
only
for that.
only read one other story, The Roads Must Roll. So, and that was only written a year later.
Okay.
So you haven't really read his masterpieces yet.
No, I haven't yet.
So
but I really like this one.
Well, yeah, and so I agree that yes, it should be a top tale, but
It's not
among
even the
Heinlein's
best.
work, it's not his best. It's not at the very top. But when you put into perspective this story coming out in 1939, what had been written before this, especially for a first story, this just blew everything out of the water.
Yeah.
Nobody was writing this good in the science fiction magazines in 1939.
Especially on a topic as sensitive as death.
Yeah.
That is an extremely uncomfortable topic for most people, which is why it's like he went right to the source of every human fear, every animal fear, every instinct, and just decided to poke the bear. And that's what I love about this story, I think. I love that.
Yeah, and so yes, it is a top tale when you consider its point in the history of science fiction and exactly what he did at that moment, and especially where that was the very moment when the golden age was first starting. We were at the starting gate of the golden age when this story hit the magazines. There had only been a couple other stories that are considered to be important in launching that period, and this story and a lot of other Heinlein stories were the quintessential John Campbell science fiction story, what he wanted for Astounding for the 1940s, which revolutionized science fiction. We can look back on it today and see it as old-fashioned, but when you put it in context of the era, Campbell and Heinlein really did revolutionize the whole thing. It was no longer guys sitting around a table and all of a sudden aliens are invading Earth and they go, oh, well, give me 15 minutes and I'll invent a super weapon with all kinds of rays that are just going to destroy them. And
It's
they
like
go
an
and
Ed Wood movie.
Yeah, I mean, that's literally what a lot of John Campbell's own stories were like in the 1930s. These people were just impossibly intelligent, and all they had to do was go and sit down with some coffee, and they'd come back with the solution that would wipe out all the aliens.
It's like Andromeda. A for an Andromeda all over again. It's like 20 minutes. I've got a solution for you.
And the characters were stiff. The aliens were always evil. Robots were always on the rampage, and I mean,
everything was chaos.
All the worst B-movie cliches of the 1950s were already written about in the science fiction magazines in the 1930s.
Absolutely.
And Campbell and Heinlein came along and changed that. And really, what I credit as the first story really is in 1938, Campbell's own Who Goes There.
Oh, yes.
That, again, was
was
so
great.
different from everything else,
Yes.
even everything that Campbell wrote before that. It really, that's where I put the starting point. And we're going to do some videos about, I've got a couple of them in mind. One for 1939, just discussing 1939. And of course it's going to kind of go into 38 and a little into 40, but you can't really pin it down to one moment.
Yeah.
And another key year that I've started to realize is 1953.
Oh, yes. We do have a lot of 1953.
The number of brilliant science
On
fiction
the
novels
list.
published in 52, 53, 54 is just mind-boggling.
It's because the year after my mother was born.
Okay.
She just struck everyone with her scientific. I don't know where I was going with that.
Well, I have some ideas about what caused that. It has to do with a lot of social things and how publishing was changing and such.
I agree. And that doesn't surprise me, because one of the things that we learned about in high school and was repeated again in college was that most of our technological advances happened during wars, when there was a lot of social turmoil and like cell phones were developed for warfare in the military. Just about every technology that we had was developed first for the military and then later became publicized in a different manner.
But for science fiction, the boom that happened in 52, 53, 54
The baby boom.
got off the ground with, first of all, Kenneth Arnold and his report of UFOs, which created a mania across the nation and instantly made everybody interested in aliens.
I mean, I am. I like the idea of us not being the only ones in the universe.
But I mean, as a result of that, that and the combination of that and Campbell kind of going off the deep end with Scientology.
Yeah.
For the first thing that happened is you had all these reports of these aliens. The second thing that happened is Astounding became kind of a joke because Campbell went off on this
Scientology
of
tangent.
following L. Ron Hubbard. And then publishing saw that everybody wanted aliens and science fiction stories, and so all of a sudden you had this publishing boom, magazines and books coming out of the woodwork everywhere, and publishers just
went
clamoring for science fiction all of a sudden. Where before that,
it was really
a science fiction convention was usually 50 people in New York.
Yeah.
And, those were awesome conventions. You had Heinlein, you had Asimov,
The best
you had
of
Poe,
the best
you had
were there.
You had Donald Wollheim, Damon Knight. They were all there.
Yep.
And they all knew each other, and there wasn't much of anybody else at those conventions.
It's just to sit and have a beer together.
Now it's
family reunion,
comics and cosplay and
graphic
big
novels,
money and all the big Hollywood studios.
movies.
Man, it's just gone.
Independent film.
down
makeup effect artists.
Yeah, it's just blown up so big, and even when I was young, it wasn't like that. Even with Star Wars, it's still, you had bigger science fiction conventions, but it wasn't like what you're seeing today. It wasn't anything like that.
Yeah.
Science fiction was still pretty much a small club for a long time.
We need to go to one. We need to do a sci-fi convention sometime. Just go and like hang out. See what halls we can come by.
See what they're like. I've only been to Gen Con when it was in Milwaukee. That was because I had to work.
Yeah. I went to an anime convention though in Milwaukee. That was pretty fun.
Okay.
But yeah.
There's usually one in Madison every year.
We should try to do that.
Yeah.
We might be road tripping. Stay tuned.
So anyway,
yeah.
If you can find the pass-through tomorrow, otherwise there are lots of other books published by Heinlein that collected LifeLine, and of course magazines and other anthologies. It's all over the place. It's a very popular story.
Yep.
And of course the PDF of that issue of Astounding is online for free.
Go find it. It's fun to read.
Anything else you want to add?
No, other than I do have to say some of the illustrations in that particular magazine were very chef's kiss. So if you do find the PDF, there's some really great art in there.
But I think for the really great art, you have to wait till you come across Virgil Finlay.
Oh. Okay.
That man was amazing. Him and
I have so much to look forward to.
Him and Lawrence Stern Stevens. Lawrence Stern Stevens was almost as good as Virgil Finlay.
Nice.
And well, in 1939, Finlay was working for Weird Tales.
Oh, okay. No.
And so he did work through in the late 30s through the 40s. The Outsider and Others by Arkham House, their very first book, had a Virgil Finlay cover illustration. It is absolutely mind-blowing.
So good. Delight.
But yeah, Astounding did have some good artwork in the 40s.
Very nice.
Hubert Rogers especially, I loved his covers.
Yeah. So there's great art. There's just a lot to appreciate in some of those old sci-fi magazines. So that's all I had, though. I really enjoyed that story. It was fantastic.
Yeah.
Go read it. Quit listen to us. I mean, listen to us, but don't listen to us. Go read it, too. And then come back and listen to us more. And then go read. That should be your whole life.
And like us, subscribe to us. Come back for more stories like this one. We're going to keep talking about... We're going to go through Heinlein's entire career.
I'm super excited about it.
Yeah. The next one will be Misfit.
I gotta look. I think I have that one.
Or is it Solution Guaranteed? I gotta look that up.
Yeah. One or the other.
Two.
One of those two. You'll be surprised when we drop the video.
And so that's coming up later in November. So come on back.
We'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us.
Bye.
Bye.